Well, it's autumn, so beware of Morris dances. Dark ones, that is. Cheers. Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about books, and not just books in general, but Discworld books in particular. And by today, we have reached book number 35 in publication order, that is Wintersmith by Sir Terry Pratchett, the third of the Tiffany Aching books, and I am very excited to talk about it. It's a good one. We'll be reading another one next, which will be Making Money. Should you want to join, the server is linked down below. We'll be talking about Making Money next. You're still welcome to join, although for this one I recommend you go and read Going Postal first, because it's a follow-up to that. Anyway, that's that. Let's talk about Wintersmith, and like always, I will start with talking about quickly what it is, why you should go and goddamn read it, and then I'll talk about some of the things that I think make this book in particular valuable, good, great, and all the other things that Discworld books always are. So let's get started, right? Alright, so Wintersmith, as I said, is the third Tiffany Aching book, and thus follows young witch-to-be, or witch-in-training Tiffany Aching in her, journey to becoming a full-on witch responsible for her own country, that being the Chalk Full of Sheep. And it does so while she's 13 now, and she accidentally stumbles into a bit of mythology, and, the way mythology works on Discworld, and the way that humans work everywhere does intersect here, and we get another story that does deal with some of the darker things. There's certainly an element of death in this one, and not just, death that we have come to expect from any Discworld novel. So there's that. It's full of jokes. It's a bit more much better structured than the previous Tiffany Aching book, which is A Hat Full of Sky. So if you didn't like that one too much, this one might be, or should be, for you, because, with a more grown-up Tiffany of age 13 now, there's definitely topics that Pratchett can tackle that he probably tried to avoid with the younger Tiffany in the previous two books. So there's that. Beyond that, Roland shows up, and he gets to do stuff this time around, which is cool. So, I don't know. It's a fantastic book. I love it. It's probably my favorite of the three early Tiffany Aching books. I don't tier rank or anything, but I think this one is the one that speaks to me the most. It's probably also the one that I read the first, because for some reason I got this one first before I got the Wee Free Man, so there's that. Maybe there's some nostalgia attached to that too. But anyway, go read all three of them. They're all great, and this one is, as I think, the greatest, and, there's more to come in the future with at least, some more of these Tiffany Aching books. Anyway, go read it. It's short. It's a good book for adults and for children, and everyone should just go and read it. And now let's talk about, spoilers and stuff, because I think that's where the meat of this is. Alright, now we're in spoiler territory, and I hope you have gone and read the book. It's, after all, not that long. Anyway, let's start with something. Pratchett starts, looking into structure again. Now, he's obviously played with structure in some of his adult Discworld novels, but this one starts out with something close to the ending, and then jumps back and does the usual, this is how we got here kind of thing, which I think works really well for this one, because it gives us a very dramatic opening. A very powerful, dramatic opening of Tiffany taking on responsibility for something she has probably done in the past, and then she goes and meets the Wintersmith, and then it all collapses, and we find out how we got there and how Tiffany gets out of it. And I think, as I said, it's interesting to see Pratchett try these kind of things with books arguably targeted at children. And also, there's a sense of real danger in this one that, the Hiver and possibly even the Queen of Fairies in the first two Tiffany Aching books did not fully convey. And this is, of course, because it's snow. sheep are freezing, people are freezing in the snow. That is a real danger that everyone can, realize and feel without having to believe in magical creatures. So having that at the beginning, I think, is interesting. Also, seeing Tiffany taking on that responsibility and her family, her village, her people that she's going to be sort of protecting as witch, rely on her, even though she is, well, still a child. She's 13 at this point. I think that whole level of responsibility I found portrayed very well, and I think it's one of those things that Pratchett is incredibly good at. We've always talked about the fact that he said that the best books for a 10-year-old are books that are written for 13-year-olds and so forth. That you should always kind of punch up above your weight in a way, at least for children's books. I think we kind of see that here as well, portray, mirrored in what happens to Tiffany. And I think it's valuable because one thing we often underestimate when we talk about children, when we talk to children, when we, when there are books written for children and so forth, is that we kind of treat them as not fully human or not fully adult. Now, obviously, they are not adult. That's not the point. My point, however, is that in your perception as a child, things are nevertheless real and dark and dangerous, and you feel that responsibility. You feel responsible for all kinds of things. So, a lot of times, the kind of dismissal that adults bring towards the worries and thoughts and feelings of responsibility and so forth of children are, they're wrong. And Pratchett doesn't do that. Pratchett is very, very good at making it very clear that, the responsibilities and worries of Tiffany Aching are real, and she has to cope with them as best as she can, which is obviously different than what an adult would probably do. But it's still great to see someone take children seriously, and not just look down at them and go like, well, it'll all clear up tomorrow. No, it probably won't all clear up tomorrow. And that sense of responsibility, I think, is something that is very powerful, and I do really appreciate that in that whole strong opening sequence before we then go back to where we left Tiffany, which is all the way up in Lancre with our old witches, Nanny Og and Granny Weatherwax, and another one, in this case it's Miss Treason, another witch that is currently the witch that Tiffany is spending time with to learn. And one thing that I find really interesting is that in the Tiffany Aching books, Margaret Garlick has completely vanished, and also I keep forgetting her name, has vanished, the girl from Masquerade, and obviously also Agnes, that's her name, Agnes Nitt, has also completely vanished. It's just Nanny Og and Granny Weatherwax, and I think it's indicative of Pratchett becoming more, I don't want to say confident, but more clear in what the essence of his different Discworld areas is, like the things that really work well, because you can see him try stuff with a younger witch, that being Agnes, or before that Magrat, and the younger witch in that whole triad of the mother, the maiden, and the crone kind of thing. You can see him try and dabble with that and play with that, and in a way, he seems to have found his footing with Agnes, not with Agnes, but with Tiffany. And maybe part of that is that with Tiffany being all about sheep and coming from the sheep country, the chalk, that being closer to Pratchett's own, area. As we know Pratchett obviously had sheep himself, and his daughter certainly had to help him treat the sheep at some point. And there's more of Pratchett in there, which I think makes it easier for him to write about that young girl witch in a way that maybe he just didn't have access to with Magrat or Agnes in the same way. So I think that works really well. On the other hand, you can see that 13-year-old Tiffany is much better suited for Pratchett to write about than 7 or 9-year-old Tiffany was in the Wee Free Man, and obviously especially in that weird one, that being A Hatful of Sky. I think because Pratchett is obviously someone who takes things seriously and Pratchett needs sort of characters that are at least somewhat smart or adult and think about stuff. That's important for Pratchett, that's where Pratchett's style shines, and that's where Pratchett's personality kind of comes through, which is why, 13-year-old Tiffany works, I think, much better. Also, obviously, as I said, the structure, the underlying story, going back to a more folklore kind of thing versus the Hyber, which was very much a Pratchett invention, the idea of Lady Summer, or the Summer Lady, and the Wintersmith, whatever you want to call the Spirit of Winter. That whole level of folklore, I think, is something that Pratchett, clearly feels attached to. Because he's dealt with that before, right? He's often come back to ideas of how folklore and mythology interact with humanity, and how folklore is obviously a story, and mythology is a way for humans to make sense of the fact that the world, changes over time, the change of seasons being something that we often, mythologize and personify. That's something that Pratchett has often dealt with the idea of, anthropomorphic personifications, with, death being one of them. We have the Hogfather story earlier on. We have all of these aspects. And I think he just takes that one again. Obviously, the Dark Morris tune, the Dark Morris dance that he talks about, he first mentions in Reaper Man, where he talks about both the spring Morris to start the summer, or to bring in the summer, and then obviously the Dark Morris in the winter, or the autumn, to end summer and bring in the winter, because you need to keep that wheel of seasons turning in a way. And I think these are things that obviously Pratchett was often interested in. I assume he's read his James Fraser Golden Bough and stuff like that at some point or other. Obviously, when he talks about killing the Year King and so forth, that one has come up again and again. Pratchett is obviously fond of these ideas, whether he believed them to be true in a factual sense or just in a narrative sense doesn't really matter, because they make for good stories. And that's certainly something we can see here with the idea that if if mythology is the abstract story of something that may have been actual ritual in the past, the personification of someone as the Wintersmith and someone as the Summer Lady, having to dance and having to do these things to bring in the seasons, and then having turned into gods, or in this case elementals, then obviously humans can be drawn back into those kind of stories. Which once again makes sense, because stories are how we make sense of our own lives, and so often we tell ourselves stories about ourselves, about others. So having that on a more mythological level makes a lot of sense, and makes for a cool story that allows Pratchett to both, tell something about Tiffany and Roland and others, but it also allows him to introduce a possibly younger audience that has not, made the mistake of reading way too much about folklore and mythology, to some of these concepts, which are once again helpful. And I think there's an educational level to everything that Pratchett does with these books, right? The way he talks about sheep and sheep shearing and sheep keeping, the way he talks about the culture when he introduces the white horse in a previous one. These are sort of educational, and you can tell, at least I think I can tell, that Pratchett is very much putting his love for England as a country, not the nation, but the people, the places, the stories. He puts that love into this part of Discworld and makes it even more English in a way, or possibly slightly Scottish with Lancre, even more that than the Discworld for adults. And I think it works well, obviously. So let's look at some of the things that he does here that I think are interesting when it comes to Tiffany. There's two main relationships I think that work really well. One of them is the young witchness coven with Anagramma and so forth, and the other one is, of course, Tiffany's relationship to, or with, or whatever you want to call it, friendship with Roland, the Baron's son she rescued in the first book. Let's start with that one. I think it's an interesting one, because it is used to embody or reenact the myth when someone has to go down and fetch back up the Summer Lady, bring her back to the world to end the reign of the Wintersmith. In this case, it is Roland. So we kind of have a mirror of Tiffany saving Roland from the Fairy Queen. This time, Roland has to go into a different realm to bring back someone else to save Tiffany. In this case. Of course, it's played with a lot of jokes, and he gets to do the running around with the Knack Feagles, which is, really funny as always. The fact that Limbo is called Limbo because the door is very low is such a dumb joke where you can just tell the Pratchett probably giggled the entire time he was writing this book just to make this one joke near the end. And there's a bunch of these ideas that it's just cool fun, but also gives a bit more dynamic to Roland as a character. And this is, I think, something I personally really appreciated, because Roland is, 30, is slightly older, 14, maybe 15, something like that. And Tiffany is 13, and they are sort of figuring out whether they are, whether they are friends, more than friends, and so forth. And the way Pratchett does that, I think, once again shows how good an observer of human behavior Terry Pratchett is, because it's very unclear and undefined, and also the way or the reason why those two are kind of thrown together, I found it was really interesting, which is because they're separate from the rest of children of their age, because Roland is the Baron's son, and Baron's sons don't necessarily hang out with kids in the village, whereas Tiffany is now the witch, which also means that she's sort of been separated from her age group and doesn't have those kind of friends. So those two kind of odd ones out, so to speak, are kind of thrown together, and I think that's an interesting thing, because it does not end with romance. It's clearly sort of something's happening there. But then again, 13-year-old to 15-year-old kids are not good at figuring this stuff out either. So to not have it full-on romance or anything, but have it more this awkward kind of, clearly they like each other, clearly they're thoughtful people, Roland likes to read books, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think it works really well, and does give nuance to something that could be handled really badly or really plumply, really, bluntly in a lot of ways. And I think I did really appreciate that. But let's talk about the Witch's Coven and the Anagramma thing, because that part is, of course, heavily inspired by Pratchett's ongoing dismissal, war, interaction, whatever you want to call it, with modern Wicca, New Age movements, which apparently Pratchett was not a huge fan of, to put it mildly. He certainly ridicules Wicca and other forms of neo-pagan stuff in a lot of Discworld books, and with Anagramma and her teacher, Miss Earwig, he kind of goes full on into that. And I thought the whole Coven thing wasn't handled too well in the last one, because Anagramma is not a character that he got really into in the last book. This time around, he changes that, and I was personally really impressed by how he does so. Because on the one hand, we see how there is that sort of struggle between old-style witchcraft of the Granny Weatherwax school versus new-style witchcraft of the flashy New Age kind of way that Miss Earwig embodies. But on the other hand, there's also just teenagers trying to work out stuff, because you could tell that, in a way, Anagramma is kind of drawn into that, domineering the Coven for all kinds of reasons, and being pushed, sort of manipulated into taking over that cottage once Miss Season dies. Season Treason, of course. Miss Reason dies. Once she's drawn into that, and she obviously fails because, and this is Pratchett, right? Proper witchcraft is more like the village cunning folk kind of person. If you've read your Ronald, God's million names today. If you've read The Triumph of the Moon, you kind of know what I'm talking about here. My point is that yeah, it's about community care and helping people, even in all kinds of ways. And it's not about gaining power, gathering power, which is very much the wizard style of thing. And you have like these small things when, obviously, notes are not supposed to be taken in just a notebook. It's supposed to be called a book of shadows, which is exactly what Gerald Gardner, the sort of founder of modern Wicca, called his spell book. And you have these kind of things where Pratchett it's not about, making yourself look cool and do, gather power and image. It's about actually caring for people. You have that conflict going on. And then when Tiffany, talks the other girls around to actually helping Anagramma meet her responsibilities and finding ways for Anagramma to actually do that and become the true witch, the true witch that does not cackle but actually takes care of people. She does embody that experience. She does embody that ideal, but they work it out themselves. Yes, there is obviously the idea that Granny Weatherwax did expect Tiffany to do so, but it still comes from within, and learning to take on responsibility and figuring out the world on your own, not because parents or other figures of authority tell you to do so. That's a huge part of growing up. That's an important element of growing up, and the fact that Pratchett uses that plot line, I think, is really, really good and makes it a very, really well done for a children's book. Plus, there is that scene where we learn why Anagramma is, once again, brilliant name, Anagramma, I love it, is so arrogant in a lot of ways. And how, when she kind of breaks down, or Tiffany forces her to admit that she is, in fact, that her parents are, in fact, really poor, and that she's overcompensating for that feeling of being worth less than, other people, because she comes from a background of poverty. That's, once again, Pratchett showing his incredible skill at observing humanity and showing a person's or a character's humanity in the blink of an eye, just like one scene, one or two, three words, and suddenly you have like a completely different image of a character. And that's just like really brilliantly done and powerfully done, because suddenly she's not just, a bad character or, a foil to Tiffany, but she's actually someone with their own problems, baggage, troubles, and so forth, trying to overcome them and possibly being led in partly the wrong way. So I did really like that part, because it did sort of, in hindsight, make the bits that I did not like so much about A Hatful of Sky come across as much better in hindsight, because it gave more meaning to all of this, and the way the dynamic within the younger witches there worked. I did really appreciate that part, it's sheer humanity. And I think that's at the end of the day what makes the Tiffany Aching books work for me, even though I'm probably not its actual target audience. It's their humanity, the way all the characters are taken seriously. While there are a lot of jokes, those jokes usually have some form of background. We see this even with Miss Treason, who is sort of, a bit of a joke in some regards, by just being so really funny and cool with the way she makes up all the stories about herself, so everyone fears her and actually does what she wants. But there's like a, there's a kernel of truth there, right? Those of you who have like ever worked in, any form of bureaucracy know that if you have to get offers from like a company for, I don't know, new software, new hardware, whatever, for example, in IT, you don't pick the one that gives you the best offer. You pick the one that seems the most professional. And oftentimes that means being more expensive and putting on that show. So the idea that that putting on a show and that reputation is far more important than the actual service you provide. Translate that into the sheer ridiculousness of, the clown skulls and stuff like that. I found, there's a core of truth to that, and it's important for us to learn these things and realize these things, and sometimes comedy is the best way of doing that. And he does so with Miss Treason, and still in a very humane way. And that whole argument of like, she's 113 years old, why would she die now? Is like, yeah, that's exactly the kind of logic we as humans do when we don't use logic. Because, yeah, it's like, she's lived so long, she can't be dying at her age. Yeah. it's an interesting way he does manage to put all of these bits together in this one. I think it kind of gelled more possibly because, you know, he's a bit more comfortable with writing about a 13-year-old. He's comfortable with coming back to these mythological elements, which he can just like tie together. Yeah, and the whole structure works out much better, and I think, yeah, it makes Wintersmith a very powerful book, not just for children, but definitely also for adults, with some valuable lessons to be learned. One really mean cat getting its comeuppance, finally, and other good elements. I really, really hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. And yeah, maybe you want to join us for the conversation for making money. Otherwise, I don't know, like, subscribe, do the things. I'll be back talking about other books very soon. Until then, I thank you for listening and watching whatever you did here. Thanks for the support, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.